Hello there, Chris from Wicked Repairs here. Hope you enjoy today's video. We have a Bilt XP series 7,000 watt generator, 10,500 watts starting, and we have a little issue with it not running. We have a storm this weekend, so the customer brought it to me in hopes that I would be able to get it done in case he needs it. The machine is not starting, and when he adds fuel to the tank and turns the petcock on, the fuel's going away into the motor. So we got fuel in the motor. The pull start will not pull the machine over. It is getting hung up. So we're going to take care of that here, and hope you enjoy the video. Well, hello everybody. Today we have a Bilt XP series 7,000 watt generator. I just started draining the engine oil because it is actually full of fuel. So I wanted to show you that. I started doing it because I wasn't going to make a video. I was just going to get this job done, but I decided to make a video anyhow, just in case this ever happens to you. Maybe this video will help. So the gentleman who had this generator said he was putting gasoline inside of it, and and he said he was putting gasoline inside the fuel tank, and the gasoline was disappearing basically from the fuel tank without it running, and then he couldn't get it running, and so he went to check the oil level, and when he went to pull out the dipstick, it started pouring out gas and oil mixed. So what happens, obviously generators, for the most part, we don't use them all the time unless you're a contractor or something using them every day for work. But when we have these generators for our home, you know, for emergencies and stuff, they sit around and they don't get used, and carburetors come up. Basically, the shelf life of ethanol fuel nowadays is about 14 days. After that, it starts to deteriorate. So it's extremely important to take whatever precautions you can take to not have your carburetor gum up. You know, anything with a metal tank, really, you want to store it full of fuel. If you don't have it stored full of fuel, it can adapt a lot of moisture, and it can create rust, and it can create moisture and water from into your fuel that's going to get into your carburetor and gum it up very easily. And what happens is the needle valve inside the carburetor will stick from debris, from stale fuel, anything that gums it up. And when you turn your fuel petcock to on, instead of the needle valve stopping the fuel flow and in the float, the fuel will actually go into your carburetor and fill it up and go down into your motor. And that's precisely what happened here. So this is all, it's almost all fuel. Okay, it's very smelly with fuel. You know, you can tell right away from the odor, of course, and from the consistency of fuel and not oil. There's nothing thick about this. I shouldn't be able to tap this lightly with my hand and have it do that. This is, you can tell it's not oil. There's some oil in there, but it's mostly fuel. Because of that, it is going to shoot out very fast when you go to drain it. So I put a little funnel here, you know, pointing it towards the drain pan so that it doesn't make a big mess and oil and gas mix goes all over the place and becomes a hazard. So what we're going to do here, we've just drained the oil and gas mix that's in the motor. I'm going to leave that stuff open for a while to let the fuel vapors and everything drain out, or evaporate out, while I'm working on the machine. I will put the plug in and fill it with oil, and I will drain it again before even running it, so that the oil can help any other fuels that might be inside the motor to come out. So I'll fill it with fresh oil, and then I'll drain it. Kind of a waste of oil, but it will save any fuel and fuel vapors that's inside the motor. So we're going to come over here next to where the carburetor is, and we are going to start to disassemble this carburetor. You know, I'm going to start by taking off the airbox lid. It's just 2 bolts here and it pops off. I'm going to take this hose off here, or we could probably let it dangle with the lid off to the side. And we're going to start getting into the carburetor so that you can see you know, how dirty it is in fact, and we'll catch you in a minute. So we're gonna start by taking off the airbox lid here. Always make sure that if it's not already, your fuel petcock is in the off position. One thing to always check is the air filter. Give it a little smell, feel, check it out to see if it's been saturated with fuel. This one is not, which is good. It's very dry. It's a little dirty, but it's dry, so this is a good thing that it's not saturated with fuel. This one's got a little crimp clamp here. I could pop it off there. So I'm gonna, it might come right off actually. It's not super tight, so I was gonna pull it off from where the grommet is, but boy, it's tight. It didn't seem like it was that tight, but it's feeling tight now. Well, you know what? I'm going to spray some lube on that rubber gasket there. To help with it coming out. Spray some lube in there. Should let it pop out pretty easily. There we go. So I'm just going to set that off to the side here. I'm going to take the breather hose off the top. And then we have 2 10mm nuts. Take the nuts off. If you don't see the other nut right away or know where it is, it's probably because this breather hose is directly in front of it. So you may not see it right away, so you're gonna have to take that off anyhow, but when you take that off you will see the nut kind of behind the hose. Take off the airbox cover there. And if you follow the electronic shutoff here, there is 2 wires and they just run along to the harness. So we're going to unplug that. I'm going to take off our fuel line. It's a little tough to get to. And is put on, the clamp was turned real hard. So I might need something thinner to get to the back of it here. Come on. I can just twist it a little bit. Be able to grab it, the clamp. There we go. Grab the clamp, pull that off. I have these nice little hose pliers that grab on the hose. Sometimes these things can be a bear if they haven't been off in a while. Give it a little twist. One thing I do always check, I'll put a little rag here and just really quick turn the fuel to the on position and make sure it does come out. It's dribbling out, but there's not much fuel inside the tank, so that's good. And it's coming out pretty clear from the fresh fuel that he did put in there. I will pop off this cap on the fuel petcock. It's a 10mm nut, and just make sure that there's no debris in there or anything like that. But sometimes the petcocks do gum up too, just like carburetors, where you turn this to on with a full tank and it doesn't flow out or barely flows out. That's something that you have to, always consider and check, because you could have multiple issues besides just a dirty carburetor. You could definitely have a dirty fuel petcock where you clean the carburetor, you put the machine back together, put fuel in it, you turn the petcock on, you go to run it, still doesn't start. Well, you could have an issue with that, or something else, who knows. But now, very carefully take the spring off of the governor lever. And we're going to have to twist the governor part on the carburetor to the full open position. Pop off the lever itself. And the cable here for the choke is very rusted on this one, so we're going to want to be careful popping that up there. Let's see. Yeah, I'm going to have to take it off here first. Yeah. And this is at 8mm on this. And of course, all generators, are going to be different the way they're set up. This particular model has a Briggs and Stratton motor. It's a Bilt XP series. But for the most part, most generators are going to be kind of set up the same. Some of them might have a cable, some of them might be electronic chokes, some are just a manual lever. So everything's kind of different depending on model and manufacturer. Excuse me. So there we go. Get that clamp and bolt off, and now we should be able to slide the carburetor off to be able to get that off. Like I said, it's pretty rusty, but yeah, there we go. So now we have our carburetor in hand. We're going to take off the float bowl. Oh, spilling some fuel here. And one of the most important things I would say is to make sure that you take out your idle knob here and pop this off. There's a couple O-rings inside here, and that's actually a jet, your idle pilot circuit jet. You need to clean that out real well. So we're gonna open this up and get to it. We got this thing's a little fragile, just a rubber boot, but yeah, we're gonna put this on the bench and we're gonna open this up together. Alright, we're gonna start. Typically I like to take some carburetor cleaner and just kind of spray it on the exterior just a little bit to get any dirt and debris out of there, because as we're taking this apart and putting it back together, we want it as clean as possible. We don't want any of that dirt and debris getting back in there as we're trying to clean it. The smallest little piece of dirt can cause a big disruption. Take those off. That's your fuel shut off. And then we're going to take this nut off here. Not 100% sure what size it is, but I think it's going to be a 14. Yeah, the 14 millimeter will do. Or a 9/16 I believe would fit as well. And look at that right away. It's very green around here, and you could tell that the inside of this carburetor is going to have some green death. There we go. Oh yeah. Look at the inside of that carburetor. All green. Look at all that in the corner. That's all stale fuel, just nastiness, debris that's inside there. Set that bowl off to the side for now. Take the pin out of the float. Pull that out. You're going to want to be careful when you're taking off this needle valve here, because there is a little spring. Okay, and you can see it's kind of almost like a picture hanger type thing. You want to slide it to that area, but you want to be careful you don't lose this spring that's on that needle valve. Okay, it just sits on there. When you put it back on, you're going to push it right into the bigger section and slide it over. Okay, so I'm going to take that off for now because I'm going to clean that needle up a little bit. I'm also going to clean the inside of this, and I'll show you how we're going to do that here in a moment. You're going to want to take the gasket off, especially if you're reusing it, because if you get carb clean on this or any kind of cleaning material, it's going to make this thing blow up like a balloon. It's not going to fit anymore. Okay, so there's a jet in the center here that we're going to be taking out to clean that. I'm going to be taking this apart. The way I do this when I take it apart, you know, technically we want to assume that the machine was running, idling properly before at some point, so the idle is going to go back about the same way it was. So you can see it's about halfway up here. You can count the threads and say, okay, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 to 5 threads, so you can get an idea of how it's set in there. We're going to take that completely off. You can count the turns when you take it off too, if you like. And you get a general idea of where to put it back when you put it back together. And then when it's on the machine, if you feel that it needs a little more adjustment when you run it, then you can adjust it when it's on the machine. So I sprayed that with some carburetor clean. I'm also going to take this lube And just kind of spray it there a little bit real quick. And I'm just going to move this around a little bit, see if any of that lube happens to work its way down in there where the O-ring is. Take that piece off first. And then slowly pop up on that. And you can see the bottom side of this. There's a little brass jet in there. So we're going to have to clean that real good, okay? And we want to clean down into that portion very well as well. You're going to want to spray into these ports, okay? Point with the screwdriver, there's a port right here and right in here. We're going to want to spray in there and make sure that it comes out of the spots it's supposed to come out of. We're going to pop that jet out here as well. And this is, I could feel that it, initially it's coming out pretty rough because of the green death that's inside of here. If it's real hard, you could always spray some carb clean inside there first. Sorry for jostling the camera. And that should, it's already loose. There we go. Okay. So it's good. The emulsion tube came out at the same time with it. So this emulsion tube, okay, we're going to want to make sure that all of these little holes are all free of debris. Okay, when we put this back in, it's going to go in the carburetor just as so, okay, up into the carburetor like this. So where this flat portion is here, that's where this jet pushes up against it, like so. So we're going to take some carb clean. I'm going to spray inside this, okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my thumb on this side, or a finger, whatever. I'm going to spray inside here and watch it come out of the jets. That was the lube, not the carb clean. I'm not paying attention. Watch your eyes when you do this, as these holes, when it's a lot of pressure, will shoot out pretty fast. Always have some eye protection on, so just be extremely careful. And then I'm going to do it the same way the other way. And I'm just watching to make sure that there's carburetor cleaner coming out of every hole. And it is. If you have to or want to, you could spray it this way into the holes a little bit. If for some reason it's really super gummed up and you can't get a hole free, you could use a little piece of wire from like a wire brush. You can use a guitar string. That's what I like to use for a lot of stuff. Use a very small gauge guitar string and stick it through these holes. Same thing with the jets if these are really plugged up. This one's actually got a pretty good hole in it, and it's spraying well, so that part is good. I always blow through everything in both directions, as well as with compressed air after. So we want to spray in these ports, as I mentioned. Make sure it's coming out of where it's supposed to come out. See it coming out of here as I'm spraying in here. So this is your main jet one. That's your pilot idle jet one. I'll spray back in here as well. And I'm going to spray just around that seat a little bit where the needle valve goes in. And I'm going to show you here how we clean that, or how I clean it. So how I like to clean these seats, because most of them are pressed in like this one is, or they have an O-ring in it. Sometimes it's real stiff. Sometimes if it's applicable, you can remove them, clean them, replace them. I'm just going to clean this one, of course. We're trying to just clean this, no parts, get this right back to the guy today without having to order anything, because I unfortunately don't have anything here for this particular carburetor and model. So the best way I have found to do this is I take Q-tips and I cut them in half, and I put a Q-tip into a drill, and then I use Mother's polish. Okay, you could use any type of polish really, as long as it's a non-abrasive polish. And what I do is I get the polish onto the tip and kind of spread it around inside there first, try to get it down in there. And I'll do that however long it really needs to take. It's usually 2 or 3 times. So I had polish on that first one. Now I'll do it without polish. I kind of try to grab some of that polish on the edge to bring it in towards the middle. I just work my way around a little bit, get it in the center also pretty good, where the tip of the needle seals. I'm going to do it one more time. Like I said, I usually, sometimes the stuff on the side, I grab that, try to pull that in. I don't know how well you can see that, but it's getting pretty dirty, okay? And it's looking pretty clean in there. And then we're going to take our carburetor cleaner, clean all that off real good. Make sure you spray through it real good to make sure that none of that stuff gets clogged in there. I'll go through the fuel inlet here as well to make sure that none of that stuff really got in there, and that we can push it out the bottom and have a good flow of fuel without any disruption of any of that polish. All right, so I just sprayed through the carburetor with compressed air. Spared you guys all the noise of the okay. So and while I was cleaning the carburetor, doing that, I let the carburetor bowl sit, and you can see all that stuff's kind of dry in there now, and just tapping it's going to get most of it out. But I usually go through this after, and all that dry stuff, I just take a little screwdriver and just lightly scrape all that dry, stale residue off of there. Of course, we want all this as clean as we possibly can. If you would leave any of that dry stuff in there, when it gets wet, it's going to start floating around in there, and it's going to be chunks of stale fuel that's going to lead to plugging up your jets again. So we're going to clean this as best as we can. Like I said, I'll use a screwdriver just like this, just to clean it up and scrape what I can off. And I'll spray it with carburetor cleaner and blow it out with compressed air as best as I can. If it's real bad, sometimes I take a little brass bristle brush and clean in there. Alright, so we cleaned out the carburetor bowl really well. Yep, that was just some wetness. Alright, we cleaned it out real well. No more debris, no more stale fuel. It's nice and clean in there, nothing that's gonna, seems like it's gonna get lodged. You know, I did scrape it a little bit with a brush as well, on a couple of tough spots that were really embedded in there. And I just lightly went over the top side too from a little bit of stuff that's in here, just so that it seats well and properly on the gasket when we put it back in. So we are going to clean this up just a little bit more because there is a lot of residue on the outside. What I do with this typically is I take just a Scotch-Brite pad and just very lightly clean the exterior off, and then I'll re-clean it with carburetor cleaner and compressed air. I'll stick that in. Same thing with the jet here, and same thing with the needle valve. So this one's just got some light debris. Actually, it's mostly wiping off of my thumb, so I will probably just use a tiny little bit of polish on one of these rags, shop rags, and just clean that, you know, residue off of the side of the needle valve. The tip looks to be in very good condition on this needle valve. It's not worn, it's not flat, it's not broken, it's intact, so there's really nothing wrong with this. Excuse me, with this. Just needs to be cleaned a little bit here so that it has good movement up and down as it seats. And so we're going to do that. I'm going to clean this a little better, and we're going to clean this up. You can see it's so crusty. I don't know if you can see that flaking off, but that is gross. So we're going to clean that all up too, because we want to make sure that that electronic shutoff valve is you know, working properly. And if there's a bunch of debris in here, it's not going to work properly. So when it's supposed to shut off the fuel, it may not. So we're going to check that as well. And then we're going to clean this out, and then we will get to putting the carburetor back together. Alright, so we've cleaned everything up. That portion where the electronic shutoff is, cleaned off that jet, the main jet, cleaned off the emulsion tube, cleaned off the needle valve, and we cleaned out the pilot circuit jet here. So now we're going to start to put this back together. So as I mentioned before, this emulsion tube, this small, well, it's actually, so the flat part goes down. So this portion up here, this is where, you know, you would picture kind of a needle slide coming in and out. So that's going to go in like so. All right. You want to make sure that it's so that when you put the jet in, this flat portion here and the flat portion of the jet push against each other. Okay, so we're going to slide that in. Slide the jet in there. Screw the jet down in. Always make sure that your jets are tight. You don't want to over tighten them, but you definitely don't want them loose. Okay, so just give it a good grip. Make sure it's in there. And for this piece that we're going to stick back in here, I always like to take just a little bit of lube and spray it on these O-rings, or a little teeny dab of grease. A little bit isn't going to hurt. Okay, but you want to make sure that it goes in pretty smoothly, as it did. This portion goes on top. This is important as well, to just stick that in there. That really doesn't get dirty. Okay, and then we're going to put our idle adjust back in. And we're going to go back just a little bit. And like I said, you just, this is kind of eyeballing where it was when we put it took it apart, I'm going to come a little bit more out. I went a little too far in to where it was when I took it apart, but that might change a little bit. So then we're going to get our float assembly needle valve back together. Remember that spring I mentioned, make sure that goes back on there properly. Slide that in there. And we have our little pin. Stick the pin in. And I always check the float heights. Now, for the most part, every single carburetor, no matter what you're working on, when you push up on it and it seats, your float should be parallel to the carburetor body. Now, it does not hurt, of course, to check specs on your particular machine, whether it be a generator, ATV, motorcycle, and try to get that spec to, okay, it's 30 millimeters or blah blah blah, whatever it happens to be. But rule of thumb, you kind of always want, when you push up on this lightly and it seats, you want that parallel to the carburetor body. And it definitely seems to be good there. It is moving up and down. You want to verify that you do see the needle in there moving up and down, and I do, so that's a good thing. I'm going to get the gasket back in its home here. The reason why I flipped it is because this is the way it was installed before, so we want to do that same thing because it might be disruptive or cause a leak the other way because it wasn't really seating properly like I liked it to. And we're going to get the float, the bowl back in. So the carburetor sits on the machine as so. So when you put the float bowl on, you always want to make sure that it's going to be in a way that this drain here can be accessed. You don't want this facing inside towards the machine. You want it outside where you're able to access it in case you want to turn the fuel off on the petcock and drain the carburetor to try to assist in the carburetor not coming up again. Always make sure your O-ring is on this or it's replaced, one or the other, or both. I'm just going to thread this in by hand first. And then we're going to give it just a quick little tweak. Again, you want it tight, you want it snug on there, but you don't want it too tight. Don't want to break anything, but we also don't want it to fall off. I would always make sure that your electronic valve, shutoff valve here, is, if you have one, they don't always have it, but this particular model does. I want to make sure that that spring feels good and like it's working in and out like it's supposed to. Hold that in place. Get these screws started by hand here. Snug those up, and voila, the carburetor is back together. So I'm going to take it back over to the machine, and we're going to put it back together and see if we get this thing running. Alright, we're going to start putting the carburetor back together. We are going to start by installing the choke piece on here. So we put that cable back in its spot there. We'll slide the carburetor onto the studs. We're going to get the governor portion back on here. Gonna have to pull on the governor and open it up, and we'll get the spring back on, that in its little hole. I'm gonna slide the carburetor all the way on here. I'm just going to connect the electronic shutoff. It's very easy. You can't mix up the wires because you have a male and female that are opposites for each wire. Being a 2-wire system, you can put it on either way anyhow. Anything that's 2 wires, you can just jump it and make it work. Make sure this little clip goes back on the wire and into the spot to keep it secure, so it doesn't bounce around, get caught in the governor, anything like that. We're good there. We're going to install the fuel line. Back onto the inlet. Put the clamp back on there. And we're going to put what is the air box back on. And this nut, this one's going to be always tough. You're going to have to, you can't really get your finger in there, so it's got a little washer part on the nut, so you're going to want to put it on the socket. Spin that on with the socket. Tighten up the nuts there. And we'll put the breather hose back into that air box. We also have this clamp to put back on here for the cable. You're going to want to make sure that this is in the open position so that the choke is not on. Okay, when you put that back on, actually going to loosen that back up a bit because I just noticed that the choke was actually partially pulled. So you want to make sure that that choke is pushed in all the way in the off position when you put this on, so that it can sit free as it's supposed to, and then tighten it down where it sits there, where it's got some little bit of free play and you know it's on properly. Which it should basically be just on the beginning of the threads, right next to the shoulder of the crimp on the cable. Alright, so that when you operate the choke, it opens properly and closes properly. Always double check that, and it seems to be working fine. Always make sure your airbox lid is relatively clean. Inside, so that we don't get any debris that gets sucked up in the carburetor. This one is pretty good. Clean this out a little bit too. And I like to pull this gasket off, but it's on there pretty good. That, because it's all bellowed out from having the piece in there, is going to be very difficult to get back in here. So I'm going to work on getting that off to be able to get this in here. So I took these pliers, my hose pliers, and I just stuck this in the inlet and I pushed little by little, worked my way out, got the gasket off, and now this is going to go in to here. It's going to go much easier than trying to force it all together as one. We are going to put the air filter back in. I'm going to put the air box cover back on. Of course, you can use a flathead or you can use a socket on these bolts. I mean, they don't need to be super tight, so it's easy to just use a flathead and get it on there. I mean, they're not like it's not a high torque thing. It's just, you know, snug it up to keep the lid on. And that's it. You got your carburetor back together. So I'm going to take you back over here real quick where we have been draining the oil. What I'm going to do, take this funnel out of here. We're going to put the drain bolt back in. I'm going to fill the engine with oil and then drain that oil as well. So I want to kind of show you something here too, because I put the oil back in the motor, then I grabbed the pull start, and I went to pull it, and it didn't go anywhere. Didn't want to go anywhere. Now it could be a few things. It could definitely be a flywheel issue with like a Woodruff key type thing, where the timing's not right and it makes it hard to pull. So I pulled the cover off and it's free, so we know that's good. The other thing that I did was I removed the spark plug, which is something you always want to do when you do a carburetor clean, because it could make a machine run really lean or really rich, fall out a plug real easy. This spark plug actually looks very nice. Has a nice chocolate brown to it. I will clean this and reuse it. We'll put it back in, no problem. I probably do have spark plugs to replace it too, so but either way, I'll just clean this and put it back in, see how it runs. But it would not pull over. I just wanted to pull it over slightly just because of the oil that I put in the motor. I wanted to kind of just turn it around to help it flush any fuel off the sidewalls before I drain that oil and then start with some fresh stuff. So considering it wouldn't pull over, I removed the spark plug because it had fuel leaking over into the engine. It can hydro lock in the top end as well. So I pulled it out. I didn't see any fuel inside there or anything, but I could not spin it over still. So it would slightly spin. So now you could see it is free moving. It would go a little bit and it would lock up. It would go a little bit and it would lock up. So what I did was I took a little bit of fogging oil, sprayed it down inside of the cylinder where the spark plug goes, and I kind of slowly turned like this back and forth, and now it's nice and free. So most likely from sitting and from getting some fuel inside the motor, the piston ring was probably slightly stuck. Might have a little bit of corrosion on the piston ring from the fuel, and you know, anything from sitting as well. But it's nice and free now. You can actually see some oil coming out of there. So just wanted to show that to you in case you ever come across anything like that as well. That was a real easy diagnostic and fix that I just did. And you know, I mean, when we put everything back together, we'll see how it is, but I'm sure it's going to be fine now because this is a night and day difference from what it was. Well, all right, here comes the moment of truth. So I changed the oil, flushed it, put fresh oil in it, and put the starter recoil back on. I put fresh fuel inside the fuel tank with stabilizer, and now we're going to see if we can get this machine to run. First things first, we'll turn the fuel petcock on. We're going to open the choke here, open that up all the way. We're going to give it a pull, see what happens. Almost. We'll shut the choke down just in case we don't need that. Make sure that's on. That'll probably help, huh? Always make sure it's in the on position. that's that. Of course, you always want to make sure that the run switch is to on, which like a nitwit I didn't check that, but you know, it probably would have started after the first pull or 3 at the most, but you know, the engine kill switch off, it's never going to start. So I put the kill switch on, it started right up. Puffed out a lot of smoke at first, as you may have saw. A lot of that is probably fogging oil that I put in the cylinder, as well as residual fuel that might have been in there. I will start this machine and run it a little bit more. We'll double check the oil. If the oil still smells like fuel, I will change it again. I have pretty confident that it's going to be fine, but if it smells like fuel, I will change it again. That way there's no fuel vapors in there or anything like that. We do want our motor oil to always be motor oil only and be clean. All the outlets worked. Saw me testing it with a heat gun. All the outlets worked, pulled power no problem. This particular machine has a good readout of digital display showing how much power is being used, so you know you're not over using your machine for something that you know, is too big. This is a nice big generator, and you know, 10,500 starting watts, 7,000 running watts. You know, which a lot of people don't realize on generators. They get you know, a 7,000 watt machine that might only put out, you know, 9,000 starting watts, or 10,005 like this. But if you have something that takes 12,000 starting watts, this is never going to work for your application. So always be sure you do your research when purchasing a generator for what you're using it for, because you will always use more wattage upon startup as opposed to running. So if something that you have is, you know, 8,000 watts, and you buy a 8,000 watt generator, it's probably not going to do it, because you need to look at the starting watts. Something that is 7,000 watts that, you know, takes 10,000 watts to start and then runs on 7,000 after, this will be perfect for. Something that takes 7,000 watts running but takes 12,000 watts starting, this will never work for it. You will trip your breaker every time trying to start something up. So with that being said, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Thank you very much for watching. Appreciate everybody subscribing, giving a like to this video, and if you have any questions, comments, leave them below. I'm more than happy to help as usual. Thank you very much.